There are battles that decide wars. There are battles that end empires. And then there is Cannae. On a blistering August day in 216 BC, the Roman Republic deployed the largest army it had ever assembled. Nearly 80,000 men stood in rigid formation under the Italian sun. Senators' sons, veteran legionaries, fresh recruits, allies bound by treaty and fear. By sunset, perhaps 50,000 of them were dead. Not defeated, destroyed. If you had stood on that field and surveyed the corpses piled in red-soaked rings, you would have said what many Romans feared. Rome was finished. And yet, Rome survived. This is the story of how Hannibal Barca delivered the most devastating tactical defeat in Roman history at the Battle of Cannae, and why it wasn't enough. The conflict we now call the Second Punic War began not in Italy, but in Spain. After losing the First Punic War, Carthage had been humiliated, stripped of Sicily, crippled by indemnities, watched carefully by a confident Roman Republic. But one family refused to accept that humiliation, the Barcids. Hamilcar Barca expanded Carthaginian power in Iberia. His son Hannibal inherited not just command, but a mission. In 218 BC, Hannibal did the unthinkable. He marched an army, including war elephants, across the Pyrenees, through southern Gaul, and over the Alps into northern Italy. Thousands died in the mountains. The survivors descended into Roman territory like ghosts from myth. The Romans were stunned. They had expected war in Spain, perhaps at sea, not this. Over the next 2 years, Hannibal dismantled Roman armies with alarming consistency. At the river Trebia, at Lake Trasimene, each time Roman confidence faltered, but not their resolve. The Senate refused negotiation. Instead, they raised more legions, more citizens, more allies. Rome's strength had always been simple: manpower and stubbornness. So, in 216 BC, they decided to end it. They would crush Hannibal with sheer weight. 2 consuls took command: Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. One cautious aristocrat, one aggressive populace. Between them, they commanded perhaps 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry, nearly double Hannibal's total force. They met him near the small Apulian town of Cannae, beside the Aufidus River. Hannibal had around 50,000 men, Libyan infantry, Iberians, Gauls, and Numidian cavalry. On paper, this was madness. Rome outnumbered him heavily, but Hannibal wasn't playing on paper. At dawn, the Romans deployed in an unusually deep formation, dense, packed columns designed to smash straight through the Carthaginian center. Hannibal did something strange. He placed his weakest troops, Gauls and Iberians, in the center. But instead of forming a straight line, he curved them outward in a convex arc. Behind them, slightly withdrawn, stood his elite African infantry. On the wings, he positioned his cavalry. The Roman plan was simple: push forward, break the center, win. The Carthaginian plan was something else entirely. The battle opened with cavalry clashes. On Rome's right, Carthaginian heavy cavalry smashed their opponents and drove them off the field. On the left, Numidian riders harassed Roman horsemen, keeping them engaged. Then the infantry collided. The Roman mass surged forward like a living battering ram. They drove into Hannibal's center, and it gave way, slowly, deliberately. The convex line flattened, then bent inward. The Romans pressed harder, sensing weakness. They were winning, or so they believed. But the deeper they pushed, the tighter their formation became. Thousands of men crushed together, shields overlapping, movement restricted. The Carthaginian center continued to retreat in controlled steps, transforming from a bulge into a concave pocket. And then the trap snapped. As the Romans surged into the pocket, Hannibal's African infantry pivoted inward on both flanks, disciplined, veteran, unyielding. They struck the Roman sides. At the same time, Carthaginian cavalry, having routed their opponents, returned to attack from behind. The Romans were surrounded, not partially, completely. This maneuver, the double envelopment, remains one of the most studied tactics in military history. But on that day, it wasn't a diagram, it was suffocation. What followed was not a rout, it was annihilation. Trapped in a tightening circle, Roman soldiers had no space to swing swords effectively, no room to flee, no oxygen in the crush. Men suffocated standing up. Others were cut down methodically. Hour after hour, the ring contracted. Ancient sources describe the killing continuing until late afternoon. Perhaps 50,000 Romans died. Among them, a consul, former consuls, senators, tribunes, an entire generation of leadership. Hannibal had achieved something extraordinary. He had destroyed Rome's greatest army. Logically, strategically, psychologically, this should have ended the war. But it didn't. After Cannae, many of Rome's southern Italian allies defected. Capua, once loyal, switched sides. Macedon considered alliance with Carthage. The road to Rome lay open, yet Hannibal did not march on the city. He lacked siege equipment, he lacked reinforcements from Carthage, and perhaps most critically, he lacked the ability to replace losses in a prolonged campaign. Rome, astonishingly, refused to negotiate. Instead, the Senate did something radical. They abandoned pride. They avoided pitched battles. They adopted the Fabian strategy, named after Quintus Fabius Maximus, harassing Hannibal, cutting supply lines, refusing direct confrontation. It was not glorious. It was survival. Rome raised new legions, even lowering age requirements, even arming slaves in desperation. Their allies in central Italy largely held firm. The Republic bent, but it did not break. Hannibal roamed Italy for more than a decade after Cannae, brilliant, undefeated in major battle, and slowly stranded. Without decisive Carthaginian support, without enough defecting allies to cripple Rome, his strategic position eroded. Meanwhile, a young Roman commander rose in Spain, Publius Cornelius Scipio. Years later, that same Scipio would carry the war to Africa, and at Zama in 202 BC, Hannibal would finally be defeated. Cannae had nearly killed Rome, but Rome learned from it. For centuries, generals would study this battle. Napoleon admired it. Modern military academies analyze it. The double envelopment at Cannae remains a masterpiece of tactical genius. But the deeper lesson may not belong to Hannibal. It belongs to Rome. Because Cannae was not just a demonstration of brilliance, it was a test of resilience. Most states, after losing tens of thousands of citizens in a single day, would sue for peace. Rome did not. They absorbed catastrophe, they adapted, they endured. And in doing so, they transformed from a regional power into an empire destined to dominate the Mediterranean. Cannae was Rome's obituary, and somehow it didn't stick. If you want more deep dives into the battles that almost changed history, the turning points, the near misses, the forgotten catastrophes, make sure to subscribe, because sometimes the most important moments in history are the ones where survival was never guaranteed.